I think we are live. Great. So hello everyone, or we'll leave a few minutes for people to start loading in, but if anyone is already here, please say hello in the chat. This is the weekly hashtag esports edu chat that we have going on Wednesdays at 5:30 Pacific time, 8:30 Eastern time. And oh, you got me excited. So my name is Samantha Anton, and I am kind of just an esports edu advocate, helping support. Oh, we have Nick in the chat as well, helping support this beautiful group and kind of the conversations that we've been having throughout the years, first on Twitter, and then now for the last year or so moved on to a weekly live stream. So to my right, to my left, right.
To your horizontal direction. I'm Carrie. I go by the Chalk Moju on Twitter. I'm the communication specialist for Snowbright Studio, and I used to stream. It may be happening again soon.
I'm excited. And then below me.
Howdy, everybody. I am AJ. I recently became the Director of Membership Sales and Services for NACE, and I'm also currently serving as the Vice Chair for the Kansas City Esports Coalition.
So fancy. So fancy. And I am Angelique Giannis. I am an English teacher in San Diego, California, and I also run our esports and our casual gaming club at our school, high school.
And I'm super excited to have the three of you a part of today's conversation, which is creating a safe space for underrepresented players, because throughout my years in scholastic esports, when I first started, I was lucky that within my team, we had a lot of women that were working on our initial efforts in Orange County. But I think as the years went on, I kind of didn't necessarily see that in other organizations or other spaces that I was collaborating with. So the three of you are examples of kind of my own safe space that's been created in the scholastic esports community. And so talking about how that happens in the high schools and in the colleges and even in our personal, families and in our own involvements as well. I'm really excited for today's conversation. And we have some great people that are in the chat as well. So as always, when you leave a chat, we are able to pin it. So feel free to leave questions or leave answers to questions that we can refer to. So yeah, I think that's a solid intro for today's topic. But I kind of just want to put it out to everyone of what are the underrepresented players in your spaces, and how are you kind of inviting them to join in?
I think for me locally here, girls were a huge one. Female identifying players. The year that I took after leaving the classroom, I subbed, and I know if you know me, you've heard about it. But one of the things that I would do is every single class I went into, I polled the kids as to what games they were playing, and we had conversations about gaming. And in pretty much every single class, once you left second grade, gaming became a really sort of like boys club, and you would get the boys saying, well, girls don't game, girls can't be good at esports, girls can't play as good, like they can't achieve the same levels. And the girls started to buy into it. So by the time you hit fourth, fifth, sixth grade, the girls were just gone. They weren't really in it anymore. They didn't talk about themselves as gamers. They didn't see themselves as gamers. But like kindergarten to second grade, everyone was pretty even. But somewhere between like second and third, you started to see that shift. When I was running Gaming for Education up here, G4E, it was really hard to get girls to become involved. Like we'd go out to events and, they would walk by and see the tent and be like, oh yeah, but this is for boys. It's like, no, it's not, like literally manned here by like not male. Like come over here, let's talk. And then, as somebody who isn't a cis male, you'd get grilled. Like I would have to prove my resume to 12-year-old boys. And that was always really wild, sitting there trying to talk about a gaming program and having, young middle school boys being like, well, okay, but tell me about this game. And then you tell them about that game. Well, tell me about this game. Like, okay, you tell them about that game. Well, can you name like 5 others? It's like, oh yeah, okay. How much time do we got? Like, honey, I've been doing this well before you were born. So here locally, it's a big gender divide. Not a whole lot of space for female identifying players. Definitely, I think, the same thing with LGBTQ people of color. But I live in in an area where there's a lot of affluence. So reaching even kids in different economic brackets is a challenge as well.
Yeah, I mean, just to ping off what Carrie was saying, I have the same experience. I work in an incredible, like one of the most diverse high schools in the nation, I think. So for me, it's not diversity racially, it's gender for sure. And like you were saying, it's the same thing. Like I am the face of our program. I'm the one who created it. It's not even like someone created it and I took it over. Like I created it from the ground up. So I think one of the things that I assumed incorrectly when we started was I thought, well, I am a woman going into this, and therefore I will be able to attract more girls into our club because, inherently, because they see me as a woman as the face, they're going to feel safe. And I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
I've been running our club for 5 years now, and I still struggle to have girls join our club, and I teach English. So I ask all my classes the same thing like Carrie was saying. I ask all my classes, what do you play? Let's talk about the games that you play. And so many girls in my classes play games, but then they don't show up to the club, or they'll show up once or twice and then never again. So it's almost like what my struggle is I feel like as a woman, you want to come into the club with a friend. So if they come in as friends and they have each other to rely on, then they stay. But if they're just a singular girl coming into the club, I struggle seeing them stay there. And that's definitely involving girls in my club is hard, and getting them to come there. And I don't know that there's anything happening that makes them feel unsafe. Because all of my kids they're very good at inviting others into play. But I think just being one of the few females in the room is just scary. Just in general, in any setting of your life is scary. But I think definitely as a high schooler, especially post-COVID, where you're still trying to find your place in a new school for a lot of these kids, is hard. And I think that's one of the misconceptions that I had was, well, I'm a girl, and because I'm a girl, that means I'll have plenty of girls in my club and it'll be easy and no problem. And that's totally not true. So that's where I struggle. I have more girls this year though, so we're holding on to them.
So I think for myself, before my role here at NACE, for those that don't know, I was the esports coach at Park University for about 2.5 years. So speaking really from that experience, I would say that I did have a few students that had approached me that later on, they didn't tell me in our initial conversations, but after they were recruited and after they came to Park University, they would come to me, and once they got to know me better and felt comfortable, they told me, like, you being who you are, you being in the position that you are, that was the reason that I reached out in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
I did feel safe kind of seeing you where you were at, the position that you were in. So I think that representation at the institutional level is wildly important. And while we still have some issues, especially within the age range that we're talking about, the education age range that we're talking about, I think it's also an issue at the institutional professional level as well still. I probably could count at least 3 or 4 different times off of the top of my head where I had either somebody from the esports community or a different esports coach or director that immediately dismissed me because of me being female identifying, and like dismissing me to my face and like not realizing the things that were coming out of their mouth and what they were saying.
Yep.
Shocking, but so I think it's that's why I think it's even more apparent that we need to, at the institutional level, at the professional level, that having change there, I think will hopefully continue to kind of trickle down. I would say that's what I'm hoping to see.
Yeah, and like Carrie was saying, I feel the same way. Like with my kids, when I first started my club, and they heard that there was a gaming club happening on campus, I was bombarded with a whole bunch of boys in my classroom, and immediately, like you could feel it, right? Like you feel like who are you? Like you're just a girl standing up there. Like I even felt that as a teacher standing in front of teenagers, which for a lot of people, teenagers scare them. For me, they don't scare me anymore. But like in that moment, it just like without even words, I felt like I needed to rattle off what I knew. Oh my God, I've been a gamer my whole life. Like I love Zelda Ocarina of Time. I collect like old school video games and I do this and this. And I used to play Counter-Strike in high school. And like, I felt that panic of like, I needed to like prove my worth.
You have to have a CV ready to hand out
like,
at any moment. Yeah.
And I wonder, now that we're kind of on this topic, I wonder if that's how girls feel walking into the club, right? Like, is that like, it's not that they don't feel unsafe, but you feel like you need to walk in and be amazing. Otherwise you shouldn't be there. Like there is no mediocre.
I think that's the case because, you know, through that whole process of subbing, you know, even asking girls what game they played, like asking the class, hey, what games do you play? There would be a point where a lot of the female identifying students wouldn't even want to share publicly. Like they were happier writing it on a piece of paper and handing it over because they were playing titles, like they were playing Overcooked or they were playing Minecraft.
Right.
They were playing games that the boys weren't as inclined to play and didn't necessarily consider to be real games. And I think that's a huge stigma that we have to get over, because if we start isolating, you know, these different types of games and considering them either real games or not, you're limiting who could qualify themselves as a gamer. And then there's just that general culture, like trying to have conversations with people and saying like, hey, you know, I guess the example would be like, you know, when you meet someone who's low-key racist, like you feel it. Yeah. They're not doing anything overt, but it is very clear that this person has issues with people from other ethnic backgrounds. Like we all know them. We've met people like that. We know how it feels to be around them. The same thing exists around gender and around sexual orientation. And like as female identifying people or even non-binary, like we've all been in spaces where there is that low-key sexism and nobody is being overt about it. Nothing is being directly said, but you feel it. You feel it like in games that are played, you feel it, you know, way things are worded, like it's there. And I think when you're young and you walk into those spaces, it feels icky. Do you want to be there? Like one of the conversations that I would have with some of the older boys is, you know, we talk about why girls, you know, didn't necessarily have the same opportunities that male competitive players did. And one of the things that would come up is just the amount of harassment that they dealt with. It's like, okay, if you had a choice to deal with this on a daily, every time you loaded up this game, this is what you had to deal with. How long would it be until you stopped playing? Because your emotional health, your mental health, at some point becomes the more important thing. And you're like, I could play this game and I could be harassed, or I could not play the game and I could find something else that's fun, that's not this, that's not multiplayer, that's not an FPS, and I can be safe. Like,
Mhm.
and a lot of people make that decision, and making that decision makes sense. And unfortunately, in the gaming community, there's that knee-jerk reaction of like, well, you've got to grow, like, got to get tougher. You know, got to have thick skin. Like, no, we shouldn't. That shouldn't be the fallback answer. If a space is unsafe, it's unsafe. Healthy boundaries say you remove yourself from unsafe situations.
Mhm.
And I appreciate Fiona's comment in the chat as well. So this all highlights the importance of the space. Everything being described is exactly what these same groups will feel walking into academic situations, job interviews, new workplaces. And I think I kind of want to transition into that culture building and that community building, because in a way, anytime you bring a group of people together, I feel like you inherently have to level the playing field,
Mhm.
where, you know, certain people in here are not inherently better than other people because of X, Y, and Z. And I think that's super important in the high school level and in that kind of like elementary level of those gaming clubs coming together, is you don't create these weird social hierarchies already within the club, when ultimately the club is supposed to exist to provide everyone that equal playing field. So I kind of want to volley to Angelique first, on if there's anything that you all do at the high school level to kind of like bring everyone together in a common language, community agreements, or anything like that.
Yeah. So when we started 5 years ago, we all sat down, and of course the club was much smaller then, and we all sat down and said, like, what are the norms that we want to follow? What are our community agreements? Like, what's important to us in this space? And luckily for me, a lot of my students that are in like the more leadership positions, basically like the kids who are seniors this year, have been there with me from the beginning, and they've really like seen this club grow since they were freshmen to seniors. And so they helped me create the community norms. So that's what we start our club with every single day. They come in, we all sign in together and playing music. I'm like on the mic telling jokes as usual and like saying hello to everybody. And then the first thing we do is nobody goes to any games. We all sit down and we all, first of all, I ask like, who's never been here before? And they stand up and we all say hello. And then the second thing we do is we go through our community agreements. And the number one thing is everyone is welcome. And if you see someone who's new, go say hello, introduce yourself, invite them to play a game with you. Um, and there's a few other ones that we've gone through, but number one always that I say in our club is everyone's welcome. It doesn't matter if they've ever been here, it doesn't matter if they've never played a game before, and it's your job as our gaming community to welcome them in, to ask them if they want to come play. So I always tell them, like, imagine you're walking into a friend group that you don't know, but you want to be friends with those people so bad. And you're standing on the outside of that circle and you don't know how to like interject, right? Like you don't know how to get into that circle, but you really want to be friends with those people. But someone asks you a question, hey, what's your name? And they introduce themselves and they say like, well, what do you think about this? That's when it clicks and when you feel welcome. So I always tell my kids, if someone's sitting near you, if someone's on the edge of you and you can see that they're watching, but they're like a little hesitant, like turn around and say like, hey, do you want to come play? Like you can have next game. Here's my controller. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about my students is they're really good at that. And, I have about 60 average or more kids in our gaming club every Thursday. And there's one of me. So I tell them, like, I can't be the welcoming committee. It has to be you. It has to be you guys. And they're really good at that. And now that my leadership students are seniors, I'm telling them, like, okay, well, you're on your way out, unfortunately, to bigger and better things, but you need to pass down these traditions to the freshmen who are now coming into our club because they don't know how it works. And there are all these assumptions and stigmas in the gaming community, and we have to break those within our club, and we have to make sure that everybody feels like they should be there. So
I will
Mic
say that
drop.
I know.
I will say at Park we didn't necessarily have while I was there wasn't a gaming club. We had our varsity program, but I think the ability for because I could talk to recruits and I could tell them that that this is a safe space. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you look like. Doesn't matter where you come from. Doesn't matter what you believe in. Like, this is a space that, me being the person that I am, I will guarantee that this is going to be a space that will be safe for you, somewhere that you can feel comfortable, somewhere that you can make friends. But I think the biggest, like, I can tell them that as their coach and like as an administrator and as the adult in the room, but I think leveraging the relationship with the athletes is almost more important at that point in time. The ability for, like, if I have one of my students join these recruiting conversations, or if we bring that recruit in to join us for a scrim or a practice, their ability to interact directly with those athletes, and like the athletes telling them, yeah, no, like, she's not just blowing smoke, right? This is legit. This is how I feel within the program. And I always kind of take the time to step away from those conversations to like let them talk, because there may be some things that they really want to be sure of and want to ask the hard questions, but they don't want to ask it in front of me as the coach, and I get that. So I think the ability, like Angelique was saying, having the students be kind of the welcoming committee, and having them like, so she these are the guidelines that she has like told you, but we actually really do these things.
Right.
And these are the things that are actually important to us. So I think leveraging the students that are super passionate about these things, that's going to be immensely helpful moving forward.
Yeah, for me, I think a big thing is like twofold. One was creating the space. So is your space overly masculine? Is it leaning too heavy to one particular culture? What are the visual representations that you're using? If you've got posters on the wall, are those teams all cis white men? Are they diverse? If you're bringing up content creators or esports athletes, are you pulling people that are in the LGBT community? Are you pulling people that are racially diverse? Are you pulling gender diversity in there? Like, who are you leaning on when you're creating like the visuals and the space around you? Because I think a lot of times, you see these very hard, very masculine, or at least very aggressive setups. And that's kind of become the norm for gaming. You see it in our mice, it's in our keyboards, it's in, even the gaming computers, and all of that. Whether it's, it is intentional. I don't want to say whether it's intentional or not. It's gendered. It is intentional. Like, marketing products, you decide who you are marketing to. So when somebody designed that mouse, they attached a gender to it for marketing purposes. If you only have that mouse in your office, you might not be intentionally setting up a male space, but that mouse was literally designed to appeal to men. You've made a decision. It's just been unintentional. So I think we need to be intentional in the spaces that create, and really think about, what kind of spaces are we building? Are these intentionally or unintentionally designed for one particular gender, one particular culture? And really think about that. And then the other thing for me was just making kids aware and building empathy. And for me, we started with streaming. Like, before I even dived into teaching content creation, we studied it, and we went into people's streams and we did stream reviews, and we went through, like, how is this person setting them up? What is the brand? Who are they marketing to? Who is safe in this broadcast, and who isn't, and why? And at first it was hard for them to get it, but after we'd started doing them, they're like, okay, well, this guy's really sexist. Like, he did this and this and this and this and this. And if I was a girl in this stream, I would have turned it off. And it's like, okay, great. And then they started like listening to pick up more stuff. And they're like, you know what? If I had a learning disability, this guy is really not supportive of that. Like, he made these comments and he made these sounds, and that was obviously attacking this particular group of people. And yeah, it was meant in humor, but if that was me, if I identified with that community that they were using as a butt of a joke, I wouldn't be safe in this community anymore. So starting with having those conversations, by the time they started creating, I could just be like, okay, remember that dude that we watched at that point. It was on Mixer, and they'd be like, oh, like, okay, like, this is why you don't say this word, this is why you don't word things that way. And they got it because they'd already studied it and they'd already made those connections, and it was easier for them to catch themselves, you know, when they were doing those things themselves. And I, you know, for me, that's how you start it's how you start changing a culture. Because oftentimes, especially if we're dealing with middle school or high school kids, we're getting them in and they belong to a culture outside of the one we're trying to build. So we have to make them aware, and then we have to slowly shift their mindset.
Yeah, one thing I really want to drop is something that I've been seeing a lot on social media lately is that some folks have had the Any Key Gamer Code of Conduct posted actually in their physical spaces. So I think having something to point to in a physical space is super important, whether it's something that you all have built from scratch. You know, I remember in college having like the notepad, the giant notepads, and then in any space you would constantly refer to that. I think now technology, you know, lets digital things be seen a lot more clearer and everything. But having those agreed upon code of conducts posted along the wall is really great too for visitors. I think even if people are just stopping by to kind of scope out the room, you know, and they're not going to talk to anyone, they're just going to look inside for 30 seconds. What are some of the things that you want those visitors to see? So I did include a link in the chat, but the link on that page also includes their Inclusion 101 training. And during my time at UCI Esports, this is something that we did use with our students. And again, in college, even in my own experience, I attended a lot of different trainings. Not every training out there is perfect. I think have had some trainings that are really questionable. The Any Key one I think is really great, though I would tone check for kind of younger audiences to see if there are slides that make sense to your students, or maybe there are adjustments that you would want to make for your own communities. But the Inclusion 101 training itself, I thought was really great for our university students. And then also too, everyone kind of attended that same training. So 6 months from then, they might pull something that they learned during that training, even if it's just like, oh, remember when we did that? As a tour guide, I remember we did a communication training one time about communicating with different cultures. And all of us categorically believed that that was one of like the worst trainings that we all had been to, and that we really shouldn't take away anything that they said in talking to like a global audience. But it was that we all learned that together. You know, even the organizers who put that together were able to learn that. And we tried to do a training to help address a need, and then we realized it didn't. But what did we learn from that? And so I think anytime that you can put kind of shared experiences together that do address that community culture, then you can only learn your community culture even better and how you can refine it even more.
Well, I think that it's the same as teaching, right? So like I have my community norms as a teacher, like this is what we do in our classroom, and these are the norms that we follow. And I think it's just it's good to set like a level playing field for everyone so that everybody has an understanding. But then it also becomes a conversation piece when those norms are not followed. Well, like here's what norm you broke, or here's a community guideline that you are not following, and let's unpack that. Why? What happened? What was the reason? You know, especially in the gaming space, rage quitting, being toxic, right? Like that comes out inherently within all of our spaces at one point or another, because for a lot of people that's how you act when you go home on the internet. So, you know, at least for me as a high school teacher, I see new kids come in all the time, and I don't have a permanent space that I work in. I work in an old cafeteria. It's not my classroom. I can't put anything in the walls. It's like built in like 19 50, like
Yeah.
it's like there is no inclusive posters, which is what you should have, right? Like as a teacher too, that's what they say. Like your students should see themselves reflected on your
Yep.
walls. That's just period what you should always have. I don't have that. So like I think having that baseline to have those conversations with people who are a part of your club um is important. I mean, it's social emotional learning, right? Like let's take what just happened and let's unpack it and let's, you said this to this person and it made them feel unsafe. Why? And I think that that's the number one thing if you're trying to start an esports club at your campus or your library or your community space, whatever it might be. Like you need to have those community guidelines and those community norms, and you need to figure out how are you going to address issues when they arise, and what kind of space do you want to create. And if you don't have the permanent space, because a lot of us don't, right?
Yeah.
Especially in public schools. Like my school would literally laugh at me if I said, can I have a whole classroom for esports? They'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, sure, you can have like this closet and whatever, but like, so as much as I that's like my dream, is to have a space with all this inclusive posters and words and have our code of conduct on the wall. It's not a reality. So how do we support that in other ways for the students who are just walking in blindly on their way home and they see a bunch of people playing games and they don't come in and start talking trash about people's moms or whatever,
Well, I think that thing that you said about how do you enforce that culture, that code of conduct, I think that's key. Like you can't let anything slide. If you hear something and you see something and you do nothing, you have accepted that behavior, you have set a precedent, and now you've pushed that boundary farther back from where you want it to be.
Right.
And I think that can be hard and it can be awkward, but when you're trying to create, especially when you're trying to establish the culture, you have to do that. You have to stop and have those hard conversations to build understanding and build empathy and hold people accountable. You can't let anything slide. And eventually you get to the point where your culture has developed and matured, and you're not necessarily the one that does that. Your community will create a space that, like, we don't do this here. And that's awesome. I know the first time that happened for me in a classroom, it was like, yes,
like, I did it.
We got here. But it takes, forming those really tight relationships, building that trust and that rapport, and removing, I want to say removing judgment from it, but yeah, removing judgment from it. Like what you said, what you did doesn't affect how I feel about you. Like you're my student. I still value you. I'm still happy that you're here. But what you said has consequences, and we need to unpack that and talk about it because that impacted somebody else. So that you can start growing from your missteps. And I think that's really important. And getting your classroom to get to that point where they allow others to grow from their missteps as well. So you don't make a mistake and then you're like attacked or canceled. It's like, okay, let's talk about this because this is, this crossed one of our community guidelines. Here's how it impacted people. Now, how do we fix that? Yeah, you got to do that 100% of the time.
A lot of people too are in this space right now post-COVID. Like I know for me, right? I came back, I did run my gaming club virtually, but I know a lot of people did not.
Yeah.
And even though I did run mine virtually, it was incredibly smaller than it is in person because I work at a Title I school. A lot of my students didn't have access to consoles or gaming computers or anything. So I just naturally, lost a bunch of people during COVID. And now we're coming back, and the majority of the kids who are attending my club either only attended virtually when it was only a couple people or never had attended at all. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse. Like I lost all of that structure that I had built prior to the shutdown, but it also gives us an opportunity to like, okay, let's reflect on what our structure looked like. Like for me, right? Like I thought when I started the club, I was going to naturally get a bunch of girls to come to the club. Well, shocker, that did not happen. So for me, I'm like been reflecting like, well, why? Like, what environment am I creating that has led to that? And why aren't more girls coming to the club? Why do I have 50 boys and 10 girls? Like, it's not just a coincidence. Like, it can't be a coincidence, right? There's no way. So it's like, well, how do I shift how we operate on a day-to-day basis? How do I shift our community guidelines in order to welcome in all of those new students who are now attending high school for the first time? You know, some of them are in 10th grade and haven't been in a school since 8th grade. So, you know, we're dealing with resetting our norms, but we're also dealing with students who have been doing God knows what for 2 years, having the anonymity online, and maybe falling into the toxic spaces of gaming. And how do we open those conversations and unpack that and create a safe space for everybody?
Yeah. And I think that's like assessing your program too periodically. Like how many times I've seen people post pictures of their esports team or the esports club, and you have to sit and say like, okay, does this group reflect the demographic of your school? If it does, then good job. You're doing the best you can in the situation that you're in. If it does not reflect the demographics of your school, something needs to change. Like, you need to look at that. Who's missing from the pictures? Why are they missing from the pictures? And what can you change to make that photograph match your school's demographic? And I don't know that people do that often enough. Really sit and look and take it apart and be like, okay, why is this photograph not matching the school site that I'm in?
Yeah, I think for kind of being in the varsity space, I definitely got better at being able to identify maybe some of those people that kind of had fallen into kind of that toxic area before they made it to collegiate, because again, a lot of the students that are pursuing collegiate esports at this point in time, they've never been in a constructive setting for their title, so they have run amok, so to speak, within their title, and it's never been structured for them, it's never been formatted for them, so they're taking something that they've done for fun for years, and now all of a sudden they're in a new space where what they say and what they do matters, not only to how they interact with their teammates, but as they represent their university, how they interact with the community, how they represent the community. So I definitely would say that I had gotten better as my time went on in the recruiting process, being able to sort of single out, and there's little tells that are like, because everybody's going to be on their best behavior when they're in a tryout. But if something goes wrong in a game or something is particularly frustrating happens, sometimes they can't really hide their true colors. So, but the ability to bring the right people into the program, I think is probably a good place to start. And then those right people within the program, again, are going to help solidify and are going to help sort of self-police the group with the guidelines that you kind of have in place. So
it's that hiring for culture and fit versus skill.
Oh, absolutely. Oh my gosh, I would much rather take maybe a gold, diamond, plat player who's super excited, really enthusiastic, wants to learn, wants to be on a team, than a grandmaster who might have a bad attitude. 1,000 times over, yes.
Yes.
And it's definitely a labor, working with some I'll say some students out there. I think definitely in the college level, you are having conversations that you don't realize you should be like. Why? It's like, why am I having this conversation? And I had a point that I was going to make with that. Now I completely lost it.
It was the cat.
It was the cat.
I know the cat really did.
You're like, oh.
No, I think it's gone. The cat definitely just took my thought.
That's why I had to kick Navi out. She had to go.
Charlie.
Yeah, mine got banned too.
Yeah, she got banned.
Thankfully,
from the
I
chat.
haven't.
Banned
Oh.
from the chat. Banned from the stream.
I remember now. But I think like anytime that you are like having that moment of like, oh my gosh, like this is such a labor of like helping you, you have to think it's like, I am doing this because it is nobody else's job to be doing it, especially someone who be a victim of what's happening. Because sometimes you are having these conversations, even though it doesn't personally affect me, you know, because of whatever reason. But those are the times that you ultimately need to be is when it's not personally affecting you, because no one who is personally affected by it should be doing the labor of helping that person understand, you know, especially because most of the time it's something about, you know, racism or ableism, something that it's just a reality check that people need to face, that, you know, you should never be the one that is making someone feel shame or feel uncomfortable or feel unsafe in this space. That is not your like God-given right that you should be doing in every single space you walk into. I guess that was my little soapbox of just like the labor is tough, but also like recognize who should be doing the labor and who should be able to remove themselves from it.
Well, and I think it's important to remember that we are models in an environment. So, you know, how are we having relationships with the people around us? Do those relationships reflect the value in the culture? You know, we're all members of the esports edu discord. You know we've seen stuff be said that's like, this is not professional, this is you know, we've seen sexism happen, even if it's subtle. Like, you know, it's our responsibility to make sure that even above us, you know, that we are representing the culture that we want to be seen, and that involves how people interact with us, you know, whether you're, you know, female identifying, whether you're queer, whether you're someone of color. Like, are you respected in your community? Are you talked over? Is your voice heard? Like, those things matter, and that means having awkward conversations with our peers, and bringing these concerns up and saying, hey, you know, this happens a lot, and it's something that we need to work on and we need to change. Or I see this comes up quite a bit, you know, maybe you haven't looked at how this feels from somebody from this particular group. You know, we do have to have those conversations so that our students don't have to experience, you know, that behavior. Yeah, braver, tougher, and more resilient. Yeah, right.
I also think, like, as someone who is running clubs at a school level, it's also your duty to make sure that you're offering variety of games. So like Carrie, what you were saying, like a lot of women, and I 100% wholeheartedly agree with this, like we end up leaving the more competitive gaming space because the second you turn on your mic, you're just getting hounded. So what do you end up doing? You end up going to those safer, low risk spaces like Minecraft, for example. So like that's the number one game when I talk to the girls in my classes. What do you play? They say Minecraft, and I'm like, why? And they're like, well, it's just fun. It's just easy. There's no like pressure involved with it. Like I can just get on and play with my friends. So I think as somebody who is creating those clubs at a school level, at a community level, it's your job to offer not just the competitive games. Like don't get into it just to offer the hottest esports games. You can offer those.
Do competitive Overcooked.
Yeah, like you can offer all those great things, but one, be aware of the titles you're offering and the things that are attached to that title and that company. And two, like make sure you're offering at all games so that someone can walk in who's maybe not comfortable jumping into those competitive games and can come in and kind of try out your club and play Minecraft with a couple people. I know that I should have it by tomorrow, but we'll see. Getting esports, not esports edu, awkward, Minecraft edu on our Chromebooks, which is going to be great because anybody can come in and just jump on Minecraft and play together and be on the server together. And I also think that was the beauty of Among Us, just coming out of nowhere, is it was a level playing field, and nobody knew what they were doing, and the strategy was so different. And I feel like as a teacher, I saw so many kids, like all the kids were playing it. And that's the first time I have ever seen all kids playing a game, like the same game. They were all in on it. And I think like they didn't feel like, well, if I played Among Us, people are going to say that I suck or that this and this and this. Like it was level, like everybody got to go in on it and it was just fun.
There was no pre-existing ego.
Right. Exactly.
Exactly.
Perfect. It's exactly what I mean. Yeah.
And I think it's important too, like when you're doing that, is having the conversations around it. Because I remember one of my girls came into school and she'd been playing Call of Duty with 3 of the boys in the classroom, and they had a horrible weekend. Like they had ended up in a lobby, like horrible things were said, and the boys had never, like they'd sort of, I won't say they bullied her into using comms, but this was their really good friend. And so it was like, well, why aren't you using comms? You're with us. And so she used comms, and it was the first time that they really got to see what she dealt with. And she showed them the messages and was telling them what she was being, sent, because she was a console player and was getting Xbox messages. And they came in and they were like, well, we were just like, we didn't realize that this is how bad it was. And so we started talking. I'm like, okay, all the girls who play FPS, like how often does this happen? And the girls are like, every single time, like every single game, every single time. It's an anomaly when it doesn't happen. And the boys just never knew. Like, I think we have to remember that oftentimes underrepresented groups, we don't share our trauma, not outside of our circle. So it's really easy for like these boys to not understand that, that one time they popped off to a girl in a game. Right. That's not the one experience she had that day. She had it in every lobby. She had stuff that was really disgusting, and this is normal. And even, having conversations with one of my students who was Black, and it was like, okay, how many times do you hear the N-word when you're playing? And the kid's like, oh yeah, but everybody says it. I'm like, yes, but when you hear slurs and it's your demographic, it hits different. It hits different. It's like hearing, queer hate speech. Like if you're straight, you're like, okay, yeah, whatever. Like I'm not even gay. But if you're queer, it's like, okay, this hits different. And a lot of times kids just don't think about that. So having those conversations and understanding like that one instance, it's upon, it's layer upon layer upon layer. And so, when we have conversations about what games we're playing and offering that variety, like why is that important? It's important because of these situations that exist. Until we can change that, we absolutely need to have safe spaces. But we also need to have that variance, because not everybody likes the same games. Like, the more diversity you can have in your gaming clubs and your esports programs, just the more people you're going to have. And even looking at the lens that your games are shot in, like there was an ad for a game that I saw the other day that all the characters were girls, and all the camera angles were either right up the butt or right down the cleavage. And it was like, I'm never going to play this game. I'm sorry. Like this is completely designed for the male gaze. And, you look at some esports titles, and there's definitely some games out there where you're like, okay, like this game was designed for the male gaze, and great, you've got it, but you have to understand that there's going to be certain players that aren't going to, they don't want that. Like, give me a strong, woman who can kick butt and isn't worried about breaking a nail and is actually wearing body armor. Like, give me body armor. Like,
and I like what you said earlier, Carrie, about having students reflect on the audience and like how would you feel in this stream, and who are you ostracizing, or who are you making feel uncomfortable by your comments. I let some of my like leadership students, when I started streaming during the pandemic on my teacher account for Fortnite Fridays and opening up my chat for anyone, like it wasn't locked down, it wasn't emote only, even though people told me to put it on emote only. I let some of my students, I said, can you mod for me, because I had my potato computer back then, and if I would have opened Twitch, it would have blown up. And but also just because I part of me wanted them to see what gets held,
what you deal with,
right? And so I didn't even say anything. I just said, "Hey, do you guys mind modding for me? Like, I'll mod you in my chat, and like just in case something happens." And I mean, we all know, we've all streamed before. The first couple times that you stream and you're playing a popular title like Fortnite, right? And you're in that category, it's almost inevitable that some random whoever is going to pop in your chat and say some weird stuff. And it was just so funny to hear them, because they are male, hear them in our Discord later, and they're like, "Oh my God, Miss Giannis, like I can't believe I blocked this and this and this and this and this." And I'm like, "Well, yeah." And they're like, they were just appalled and so upset. And they're like, "But like, you're a girl." And I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "And you're a teacher. Like, how could someone say that to you?" I'm like, "Because that's just what it's like in this space." And I think that's how we change things, is for and this is not just for gender. This is for race.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like sexual orientation. This is for how you identify. Like, you have to see it from the other side, and then you're like, "Oh, this is why we need to change it, and what do we do to change that?"
It's like it has to impact people you care about.
That too, right?
And it means that we have to be open to conversations. You know, we have to be willing to share our experiences. You know, which, as we said before, sometimes we're not in the place to do that. And sometimes we are. So if you are, you know, being honest and sharing that, or at least not holding back what our reality is like, it also means that you have to build a culture where you can be wrong, you know, where you can have been the offender. And it's not like you're an evil person. You just didn't know better at the time. There's like a song, like mistakes or whatever, just regrets are just lessons we haven't learned yet. Like that's the truth. So, you know, you're going to make missteps around other groups that you are not native to, because that's outside of what you're used to. So you've got to be able to hear somebody speak their truth and see your past actions in it and go, "Oh, okay, I've got a different path to take in the future. Like, I didn't realize that this was an issue. Now I know it's an issue, and now I can do better." Yeah.
So I was going to actually take us to final thoughts, and Carrie took my final thought. Especially for me coming through higher education and the things that we've been through with academia. A lot of the language that we use, it's just so not even outdated, but just wrong. You know, when you really look at who you're talking about and, you know, what exactly you're bringing up, it's just so interesting how many times we've been taught to say things this way, but those were never coming from the people that we were talking about.
Yeah.
So really be prepared to learn and unlearn. And I also wanted to mention Bradford's comment in the chat, which is for those that are working directly with students, is that's when you ask students, "So what should we do about it? Let's stop and pause and see how we can fix this in our space and grow it." And I think humbling ourselves to know that we will never be perfect. No esports program or esports space will ever be perfect, but it's what you do about when inappropriate, wrong things happen. How you address it is super important. So that is my co-opted final thought for this week, and I will take it to Charlie.
Charlie, who I
think Charlie got booted.
He got the boot.
Meow meow.
All the cats got banned.
So I would say,
so no cat.
Yeah, no cats allowed.
Except for my picture of Navi right there. He's right
I
there.
need to put one of Charlie
Yeah.
on my green screen. So my final thought, something that Carrie said that is just has been replaying in my head for the past like 5 minutes since she said it, is like the sharing of trauma. Like as this is something that all of us on this call has experienced. We know people who have experienced what we have, but we don't talk about it. It's not a fun conversation to have. It's not an easy conversation to have, but a quick anecdote is, one of my athletes that I had when I was at Park was, depending on the day, went by a different name, went by a different pronoun, and they were so afraid of being able to talk to their teammates about it and like really opening up and saying, hey, like, this is who I am depending on the day. And then after they sat down and had that conversation with the team, you could just see eyes just like it was just like an aha moment for all of the teammates, and like really understanding somebody's struggles with just being who they are,
Yeah.
which is awful. Struggling for just trying to be the person that you are is terrible. So my final thought is, it's not hard to be nice. It really does not take a lot of effort just to be nice and to be courteous. You don't know what people are going through. You don't know what somebody is currently dealing with at this point in time. So take pause, respect the people that are around you, respect the people that you are getting into games with. And I guarantee you, if you go in with that mindset, your own personal gaming experience is going to be so much more enjoyable because you're focusing on the positives and you're not focusing on the negatives or the what should haves or what could have been. So go in with a positive mindset and be nice and respectful to other people.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's giving people room for growth. We're at a point in a lot of things in our society where studios are having to grow and change, where esports organizations are having to grow and change, where individuals are having to grow and change. And you can come from a really gnarly background, and you know we need to allow these people and these groups to start putting in the work to make their spaces and make themselves better, and encourage that and realize that it's not a switch, that it doesn't instantly happen. So allowing organizations to reach out for help when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and recognizing when change is starting to occur, um, and continuing to nudge so to make sure that they don't stall out, but being aware that that process can at times be slow depending on how big of a culture shift they're having to go through, because I am seeing some groups starting to make that work, and there's a little bit of a kickback sometimes against that. So allowing people that room to change, I think, is important. um, if we want the space to be open and accepting and diverse, we have to allow those organizations that haven't been find their way into that new reality, realizing it's not going to be smooth, but we need to support the effort that they're doing, to help encourage them to continue with it.
I think for me, like doing a pulse check every once in a while. Carrie, I know you said like you just need to check in on your clubs, and I think when you start a club or you're starting a program, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, what kind of environment do I want to create? And then when you welcome the first people into your space, you ask them, what kind of environment do they want to create? Like, what's your ideal gaming space? And I guarantee not one person would ever say that it's toxic or racist or homophobic or sexist, right? Nobody ever would say that. So, having that conversations are important. They're number one. And creating a space where you have that open communication, where people feel safe to share how they're feeling. But if they don't, right? Like for me, I know that I have freshman and sophomore students who are like, who the heck is this lady? And probably if I ask them, do you feel safe? They would probably say, yeah. But like, who knows if that's true? So I think it's important to do a pulse check anonymously too. Like just throw out some anonymous
100%.
surveys and say, how are you feeling? Like you attended this space today, and how did it make you feel? Who made you feel that way? And what can we do to be better, or how do we keep this environment going? And then really being okay with change, like you said, Carrie, and being able to reflect on the space you're creating. That's my final thought. My secondary final thought is I'm going to be on the news tomorrow. So
Yay!
KSI?
yeah, no, ABC 10 News in San
Ooh,
Diego.
I'm gonna watch.
Awesome.
At 4, they came and did a
4
profile
a.m.?
on my 4
Oh.
p.m. They came and did a story on my gaming program. So
It's exciting.
it's supposed to be on the news tomorrow. So that's my exciting final thought. Women in gaming.
Yay!
Well, I'm gonna be able to actually watch it on TV
Yes!
tomorrow, so I'm gonna take a little video of it.
Sam and I are in the same city, y'all.
Same area code. Thank you, the three of you, for joining me this week for this is our 4th Esports EDU chat of the year. So we will be back weekly in October, and Carrie is hosting next Wednesday. So be sure to join us next Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their week. This will be available on YouTube, so if you're just tuning in now, you can check the YouTube. At some point, it'll be processed and available on there. But yeah, we'll see everyone next week. Bye.
Bye, y'all.